Grab your cup of coffee. Sit down for a story. Let's all go exploring. Making it after 40. Making it after 40. Making it after 40.
Hello, friends. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Making It After 40. I am your host, Lisa Rodriguez. I am an actor and writer who is still trying to make it after the age of 40. On this show, we explore what it means to be an artist trying to make it as a middle-aged person. This is episode 26. I would just like to take a moment and celebrate the fact that I have produced, edited, and hosted 26 episodes of this podcast. And that means more to me than I could have ever imagined. The goal of this podcast was to connect artists with each other as we struggle, grind, explore, grow in whatever career it is that you have after the age of 40. And I've gotten that and so much more. I've made new friends. A community of like-minded folks is brewing. I've connected artists who may end up working together at some point, and I've looped in other folks who are not artists, folks in other industries who can identify with the challenges of changing careers or reevaluating your life goals at this age. I want to let you know that I feel so honored that each of you have taken the time to listen to the show, to check it out, maybe shed some tears or maybe share some laughs. It feels really special to get to be a part of this journey. My first episode was released on June 28th of this year, and I've managed to release a new episode every week since. I plan to continue to do so in the new year, but for next week, I'm planning to take a break. I'm going to take that time to celebrate the holidays, spend time with my family, and get ready for the new season that will begin in 2023. I will try to get you a new episode by January 3rd, but I might need 2 weeks off, so just stay tuned. If I don't meet that January 3rd deadline, I promise you I will have my first episode ready to go by the second week of January. So be sure to subscribe, and then you'll know exactly when I'm back at it. Thank you again for everything. Now, today my guest is Eric Moschopedis. Eric is an interdisciplinary artist who works with his life partner and artist partner, Mia Rushton. And Eric is one of my dearest friends. We met while we were both studying theater abroad at Lancaster University in Northern England. Eric really helped to shape my relationship with art and theater. He's the one who got me excited about surrealism and embracing being a weirdo. He challenged my worldview and challenged me to go outside my comfort zone when creating art. And he, along with our friends Adam Shakonovsky and Chris Dabbs, showed me that we can create our own work, which is exactly what we did. I loved this conversation with Eric as we both got to see how each of us has grown and changed in so many ways. I hope you love it too. Enjoy the show. I am so excited to share our first sponsor, Rustic Winds. Based out of San Diego County, Rustic Winds is a family-owned and operated small business that produces handmade artisan soy candles and bath and body products. Rustic Winds uses IFRA-regulated and certified fragrances, and their products are palm-free, vegan, and made from organic oils. I love Rustic Winds products. Their custom blends of scents are incredibly delicious, and they are free of phthalates, sulfates, and parabens. It really doesn't get better than that. I personally have been trying to cut back on plastics, so I ditched my shower gel in that plastic bottle and switched to using their cold processed bar soaps. My personal favorites are birthday cake and honeysuckle jasmine. If you're looking to support small business for your holiday gifts, or maybe you're looking to change things up with your regular body care routine, please check out Rustic Winds on their website at www.rusticwinds.com or check them out on Instagram using their handle @rusticwinds. For my listeners, they're offering new customers 15% off. Use code MAKINGIT, MAKINGIT. Check them out today. Yeah. Okay, so today I have Eric Moschopedis. Eric is one of my dearest, longest friends that I met while studying abroad in England. He's Canadian, so I have to say, Eric, one of my favorite things about you is like listening to your accent. The like, oh, for this project. I love that, the project.
I don't hear it myself. But,
I know, it's so dumb, but to me, it's like sounds so unique. And every time I hear someone Canadian, I'm like, oh, that's how Eric sounds. Anyway, so Eric and I met at University of Lancaster in the UK in Northern England, where we were both studying theater, and specifically, which I didn't know going into the program at Lancaster. I just like picked a school. I don't even remember if I picked it. That's just where I ended up getting to go. The program was so focused on avant-garde theater, and for me, it was a whole new world. I had never been exposed to anything like that. It really kind of changed the way I looked at art and the way I looked at theater and like what you can do with that. So, but anyway, okay, let me get more into Eric. So Eric is an artist, an interdisciplinary artist, and he works with his partner, Mia Rushton. And Mia's not on this interview, but she's lovely and awesome and wonderful. And you guys create some like really interesting art for the greater good and for communities all around the world, which is really cool. So I'm going to let you start talking about what you do before I get it wrong.
A very good start. So Mia and I, my background, as you said, is in theater and performance. And Mia's background is in the visual arts, craft, printmaking, drawing, those kinds of things. And we never really thought we would work together. But as I was finishing grad school, we saw an open call for a public type of project, community-based project or whatever. And on a whim, we put in an application to do a public napping project. And we used Mia's crafting techniques. So she hand sewed a number of sleeping masks, and we had iron-ons that people could use to design the masks for themselves. And the project came out of frustrations we were having with our home city, Calgary, where we live, that there was a lot of anti-loitering legislation that was being passed. So we thought, how can we use art as a way to, essentially protest those laws? And so we kind of, at that point, the masks were a form of camouflage, and we figured, anyhow. So that's where it started. We did this public napping project, and we thought it'd be a one-off thing.
Yeah.
And here we are 15 years later, still making work together. And it's very much a collision of performance, in all of its different iterations, from, though very rarely theater, but but craft and cultural geography, thinking a lot about that. And our focus is really, in the last 6 or 7 years, been around ecology and thinking about interspecies relationships. So how do we as humans interact, or what are our relationships to the non-human world?
I think one of the projects that you guys worked on, and before we jumped on, I was looking at your website and looking at some of your past projects, and some of them I remember from seeing on your Instagram and following along. And one in particular was, I think it took place in Calgary or in Canada, at least, was the native grasses, where you photograph the native grasses in the house, and then you set up like an area in the city where you planted native grasses. And at that time, I think we had just bought the house that I'm in now, and I was like pulling weeds and whatnot. And then I would look at your Instagram talking about like, well, like why is this considered a weed? Why is this considered unsavory, or not? Maybe not unsavory, but like undesirable. And so it made me think about it. And I still picked my dandelions, but
do you eat them?
But I don't. I'm too scared. We live too close to the freeway. I'm worried about. Yeah, I'm a little bit worried about that.
Yeah.
But it did make me think about, like, as we've redone our landscaping, like, how can I incorporate native plants into our landscaping to beautify a property using what's native, not just to Southern California, but to this area as much as possible. Like, we've planted milkweed, and because I really want to help the monarch butterflies, and So I'm trying to like make sure, okay, did I get the right variety of milkweed? And so like even just on me, your art had a little impact from afar.
That's cool. I mean, us as well. So that project, we were asked to do some research about. So Canada was celebrating its 150th anniversary as a country,
Mm-hmm.
and we were asked to do some research about an old, would have been a mansion at the time, but it was an old house that was built just out on the outskirts of Calgary. But at the time that that house was built, or sorry, the time that Canada would have celebrated its 150th anniversary, I don't think that house was yet built. So there was still native prairie there. So when we were asked to do research about the kind of biodiversity in the area, it made a lot of sense to actually go back to what were the native plant species.
Yeah.
And so, so that's kind of where that came from. But the impact it had on us was that the next year we actually tore up our front lawn and replanted with all native plants and flowers. So
That's great.
Yeah, it's for those folks out there who don't like spending money on water. It makes a lot of sense to have indigenous plants in your yard because they're designed to survive in arid climates. I'm thinking of California and Alberta, both of which are essentially deserts.
Yeah. I think especially now, I don't know about you guys, but we're going through a severe drought, and it's kind of really put it to the forefront. My husband and I had really considered putting in sod in the front because we're like, oh, we want the kids to be able to run around on it. And then just this last year, we didn't get the chance to do it. And then when we finally figured out the time and the funds to do it, we just had to change our heart. We're like, no, this is stupid. Like, why are we going to put in sod for like the next 10 or 5 years that our kids are going to want to play on it? Or we could just like do something that's a little bit more eco-friendly. And
yeah, exactly. And, certainly with the climate crisis, we have to start thinking about these kinds of things. And, those kinds of, you talked about weeds. A project that Mia and I have done a few different projects using weeds, but one of them was collecting, like going through a neighborhood, several neighborhoods in a city, and collecting edible plant life, and then turning those plants into teas that we then froze and created popsicles. And the idea, this is the performative element, is that the popsicles would perform inside the mouths of the people who ate them. So the mouth was a stage essentially for the flavor of this neighborhood.
Oh.
And so my point is that we have to get used to eating, I think, what's around us, and trying to figure out how we can grow our own food, or the weeds that are edible and we can take advantage of to, every year there's a bluff, like a hill outside the house for where we live. And I'll go and collect dandelions, the first dandelions that come up before the dogs pee on them. And then I boil them up and eat them, and sometimes keep the flowers for tea or whatever. But yeah.
Yeah. Dandelion tea is really good. I mean, I've definitely bought dandelion tea at the store. It seems kind of silly when you could go out and just like pick it. But
you're right to be cautious of exhaust and other pollutants that are on plants.
That's like a challenge because I want to grow food, and I have tomato plants in the back. I think I'd mentioned this to you before. I have some tomato plants, and I wash them really good when I bring them in, but I do want to be able to like grow some other things. And we put some planter box incorporating into our front yard landscape is like, okay, well, how can I use some of this to have food? I planted some artichoke plants because I think they look really pretty, and then we'll get artichokes, and I love artichokes.
Yeah.
But yeah, how do you incorporate that all, and then also keep in mind the pollutants? I don't know. It's a weird balance.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the answer is to that. My instinct is to say that a homegrown tomato might be more healthy than one that's created somewhere else, but I'm not sure if that's true or not.
And at the end of the day, maybe we're just breathing it all in anyway. So
we're all in big trouble.
Anyway, well, tell me a little bit about how, like you just talked about how you guys came up with this idea, but I think what's really neat about what you and me are doing now is that when we were in Lancaster, there was so much focus on the avant-garde, like I said, and then it became like we did some stuff with performance art, and we had that Give a Shit campaign and all that stuff that we did at the school that in my mind, I didn't really see it as like, okay, well, this isn't practical. Like, what am I going to do with it when we're done with it? It was fun, and I really enjoyed it. And I felt like in the time, like, oh, well, maybe we could be making a difference. But to me, the difference was more like, oh, well, then we'll devise theater and you can use the theater to pull people in. And what's really interesting is that you really kind of took some of those core values and those teachings of using the art and you incorporate it into your life. And I really respect that because you totally have embraced that artist lifestyle and actually make a difference instead of like, I don't know, I went back to my normal life and tried to like get into the grind.
Well, I mean, our life is
Yeah.
our life is still very much a grind. It's just that what we make is art. And maybe I'll just as a quick interjection, it's like, we also have day jobs. So
Yeah.
we work part-time. We have casual jobs. This is my piece of advice when young artists always say, how do I do this? I always say, get a good unionized casual job that you
Yeah.
can take time off and work 10 hours a week or whatever you need to do to survive. And then the rest of the time, make your work.
Yeah.
Anyhow, but that I'm still I just wrote a grant recently, actually, and I have not used this kind of language in a long time, but I describe myself as an agnostic, spiritually agnostic surrealist. Meaning that like we know the bad things of surrealism now and modernism and its ties to colonialism, all those kinds of things, but still I still can't I feel like that's where I still reside in kind of the deep artist part of myself is feels like that's where I still am, is in the kind of the surrealist world. But it's true, for me, when I went to Lancaster, I can't, when you were talking about it just now, I can't remember if I knew what the program was going to be like before I registered. All I knew was that was the only option I had as an exchange program. So that's where I had to go. Yeah. But when I'd got there, I'd already spent a couple of years digging into the early avant-garde. I was just in love with it. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It made so much sense to me. So I feel like, the kind of the way in which those artists were, that art was life and life was art. And I think that's kind of how we try to act as much as we can, that we try to live by the same rules that we use for art. We try to use the same rules in our daily life. And that's, for us, and in a way, that early avant-garde, like one of the catchphrases was like, what does it mean to be human? And I think that's still very much at the core of what Mia and I do, is trying to put ourselves into situations where who we are is put into question. So sometimes that means relationships with other people. Sometimes that means relationships with landscapes. Sometimes that means relationships with other species. And I guess we're constantly trying to figure out who we are in this, in the world, and how we can, I suppose how we can become better human beings, but at the same time, and more recently, it's how we can become better neighbors to other species is kind of really our focus. But that early avant-garde stuff, I don't talk about it very often, but it's still very much the core of who I am.
Yeah. And I remember that you knew what was going on. I didn't. But like you already had, and that was cool. And like I think that was kind of for me anyway, I felt like, okay, I need to catch up, and of course you were very giving with your information and like, hey, like let's bring you in and let's play and have fun. And I think for you and I, we both kind of embraced that, the whole idea that's like it's just play. Let's just have fun. Like, let's not take it so seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely serious matters, and it can be used to tell some like really important stories, and the work that you're doing is super important. But at the end of the day, like, we can't take ourselves too seriously.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's like a major thing for me and I, is like, take the work, but not yourself seriously. And we try to stick by that. It doesn't always work, but yeah. And when you said that, the idea of just, we decided just to have fun, and didn't we have so much fun?
So much fun.
My God, I wish I could go back to those days. I dream of it all the time.
Oh, you do?
All the time. I think, man, like I think about like, backstories that like, you and I and our friend Adam and Chris, and we spent, I think, 6 weeks together making a performance that was,
Yes.
a theater piece, but we'd written it all ourselves, and
Yeah.
and it was weird and it was strange, and I think it like pushed all of us out of our comfort zone as to what we were
Yeah.
doing. But also, we took bathroom breaks together. We
Yeah.
would spoon on the couch during like breaks. It was so much fun. It was
Yeah.
like and
Yeah.
I still feel like I'm constantly trying to recreate those days. But isn't that what we all do? Just try to relive our youth.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And what I loved about that whole experience was that it was very much it felt very much we were all on the same playing field. We're all on equal terms, and no one's ideas were more important than anybody else's, and we all listened to each other, and it was like a little family that we created.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved that place.
Yeah.
Synaptic relapse.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
I think it was synaptic relapse optional.
Optional.
God.
Yeah.
We didn't say we weren't pretentious when we were younger.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, like I said, like you said, the work was really important.
Yeah. And, but that experience, I think, shaped everything for me, because I didn't understand, when I was doing my undergrad before going to England, I really didn't like the theater department. I wasn't that interested in being an actor.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't make a lot of sense. I wasn't that talented as an actor anyways. That wasn't what I did, but I was pretty good as a performer. And, there's a distinction there, that, I often describe it as like, an actor does lines, text, and a performer or performance artist shovels gravel. Like there's one's task based and the other is kind of a pretend scenario. But anyhow, but that experience really mattered to me. And like when I got back to Calgary after studying abroad, that's when I started my first performance company. And like even before leaving university, I'd formed this performance company with some friends, and we were making and creating our own performance in found spaces. And then shortly after, typically what happens in Calgary is artists leave the city for Montreal or Toronto or Vancouver, and very few artists stay, or at least at the time. And we made a decision. We said, what happens if we stay in Calgary? Like, what would it look like? What would our, how can we do that? And we thought that was a really important political gesture, just to stay here instead of leaving. But then we also wanted to know who is our community of people, and that became really important to us. So I started a festival, and largely with the idea that we could start to meet other artists in the city from different disciplines, and we would then build a community and build that kind of sense of family that we were just talking about. And that was really important. And so, early in I feel like I've had multiple careers, but that particular part of my career where I ran this performance company with some friends, I curated a performance and visual art festival, ran 2 performance and visual art spaces. And I think we'd created about 35 performances. And that was from the age of 20 to 25, 26, 27, I think. And then I got offered, we were kind of getting bored of it because we felt like we were just kind of replicating what people thought we should do.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone else would tell you that, but that's what we thought. And then I got offered $14,000 to go to grad school. And that was $4,000 more than I was currently making. And I thought, I gotta go, right?
Yeah.
So that was the end of phase 1. And then grad school was kind of a phase 2. And then phase 3 was the work that Mia and I created.
And you met Mia at grad school?
No, I met Mia before I went to grad school, actually. So Mia was working at a fabric shop, and I went in to buy fabric for a performance that I was creating. And I was like, damn, who's this girl? And then I went back and I invited her to the performance that I was creating, and she didn't show up. And I thought, oh, that's really too bad. And then I went to Montreal for the summer. And it turns out Mia didn't come because she was in London on holiday or something. And then anyways, when I came back from Montreal in the fall, we ran into each other at a show, like a music show, and been inseparable ever since.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
You know, those people who like broke up over the pandemic and stuff. Mia and I were just like, what the hell's going on? This is exactly how we live.
Yeah.
Lockdown? We don't know what that means. Yeah.
This is just our life.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, no. I was just curious because I know I came to visit you in Calgary in the winter of 2001.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so at that point you hadn't met her yet, and so
No.
I couldn't remember when you guys ended up meeting each other.
Yeah. Yeah, we've been dating now for 18 years and working together for 15 years.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And that's really special that you guys have been able to have this partnership that works, where you guys can be romantic partners, but then also be artist partners. That it doesn't always work that way for people.
Yeah, it's really, for us is actually quite easy, but I think for a lot of people it's quite difficult.
Yeah.
I don't know what about us makes it work.
You're just better than everybody else.
No, not at all. Even I think that we've just kind of gone through phases in how our practices worked.
Yeah.
And so in some of the early projects, I would pitch them to Mia. She would say they're bonkers, and then I would push really hard until she agreed to do it, which is maybe not the fairest way to work together. But Mia had the craft background that I didn't have at that point in time. So she would do a lot of the kind of visual elements to the projects. And then eventually, as we both learned each other's skills, it just blended more and more and more. And then I think that probably around 2014, 15, 16, I feel like Mia became the one who generated most of the ideas in our collaboration. I don't know if she would think that that's true or not, because maybe it's not as true today. Like, it's far more mixed, but there was kind of these phases where, one of us would push ideas more. And I think very early on, our work was very much about creating a project that could then be toured, or a project that could be exhibited. So it was like a defined thing, Yeah. And that's coming from my background in theater, where it was like, okay, you make a thing and then you show it. Whereas Mia, as a visual artist, had a studio practice that was like, you would experiment and you'd explore, and things would take a lot longer, and you would make a bunch of stuff, and it wouldn't matter what that thing was just yet, but maybe in a year later, it made sense to something you were doing. And I sort of feel like that was like the kind of second phase of our practice. And now we're on a third phase where it's kind of a mixture of those two things, where we try to spend way more time doing research and way more time exploring a subject, and then trying to produce something out of it. So it's kind of like far more hybrid between our two practices. Yeah.
At this point now, I imagine you guys have a pretty good reputation among, I don't know what factor of the art community it is, or if it's just like, public art communities. But my question is, do people come to you to try to bring something to their city, or do you guys start researching and then approach people to find things? Because, like, for example, I was looking at your most recent project with the 3 forests, or the 3 woods.
Yeah.
And so that seems so specific. So I'm wondering how you guys get involved with some of these places, because it's like a forest in Norway, a forest in Germany, and then I can't remember where the third.
In England, yeah.
In England, yeah.
Yeah,
how do you get there?
Yeah, it's each project is different, and so sometimes we self-produce. So a lot of our early work was kind of self-producing our own thing, and that kind of comes out of like my theater background as well, where I wasn't interested in like the hierarchy of theater. I wasn't interested in the royalties that you would need to pay if you did a play. Like, that seemed crazy to me. Like, why don't we just write it ourselves? So it kind of came out of that kind of DIY aesthetic and that DIY ethos. And so some projects, my point is that sometimes we self-produce projects, and then they become a product we can sell. So then we would apply to open calls. Sometimes we produce things very specifically for somewhere. So this project, 3 Woods, that you're talking about, we were invited to go to a festival in Vancouver and to do a pitch session, which is like Dragon's Den or Shark Tank style thing, where you're like, hey, buy this show. And that's typically what people do, is they say, okay, we've got this performance or this idea, and we want curators or producers in the crowd to pay, to support the development of those works. And when we were asked to do something, it felt like we were being called in as to disturb or disrupt the kind of type of work that was being discussed, because as like a bit of an aside, although we were visual artists largely, our network tends to be in the theater world. So it's a very weird thing. So here we are at this festival. It's largely a theater or dance festival, and people are pitching shows that they've made, and we come in, and the expectation is that we were asked to do like a short artist talk, but we thought, no, we've got all these people here in front of us. Let's tell them what we actually want to do. Let's just be honest with these people. And we said, hey, we're interested in biodiversity. We have a few things that guide us through our practice, which is like doubt, insecurity, and everything in that realm. We're just very unconfident people. And, but we said, but hey, if you hired us, although we're socially awkward, we could come to your community and do socially engaged work. And we said the theme that we want to deal with is biodiversity and interspecies relationships. And we kind of suggested some ideas, like maybe we would run a workshop with grandmas about how to talk to mushrooms, or we would work with people who worked at a fish processing plant. We weren't certain what would happen. And so at the end of that pitch session that we did, I think that weekend we probably had about 15 or 16 meetings with people, just like rapid fire. Everyone's like, we need to talk. We're like, oh, this is really overwhelming. But there was 3 curators that we were really interested in, and we just happened to all be in a gymnasium together having lunch and talking about like, what can we do? And I just at one point just stopped and I said, wait a second, are there woodlands in your area? And each of them said, oh yes, there are woods. And I said, that's the thing. And so that's where it started from. And that was in February 2020. And of course the pandemic hit the next month. And so we had to figure out how to do long distance social engagement work for 2 years before we ever got to go overseas. Yeah. But so that's kind of the answer to your question, I suppose. Like, how do we get these gigs? Yeah. It's partly like we have a network that people are familiar with our work. Sometimes we apply directly to things. Sometimes we self-produce them. But, I've been thinking so much about our practice since you started doing this podcast, because I was like, holy shit, what does it mean to make it after 40? And like, Mia and I just returned from this 10-month tour abroad and have returned with like zero money. Like we feel like we're 19 again and like starting all over, because we're celebrating our 15th anniversary this year as an artist couple. But also we're like, who is our network again? How do we get funding? Where are we getting funding from? Are we applying to the right types of funders? Like, should we be applying to ecological societies instead of arts grants? So it's like, we're actually at a point weirdly where we're really reevaluating everything we do. And one of the major questions is like, how do we sell our work, or how do we find opportunities for ourselves? And what are those opportunities? And how do they make most sense to who we are as artists now? So we kind of feel like we're starting from scratch, although we're not starting from scratch, because we have, a reputation and a base, underneath us. But that's like we feel so excited. And so like when your podcast came out, I was like, yes, this is like, what does it mean to make it after 40? Particularly when like, we feel like as artists, we're at this like weird point where it's like, do we keep doing it or do we stop? And what,
Yeah, it is. It's interesting too, because you guys have that thing like you talked about, that you because of the art that you're doing, there's no guarantees for any funding. There's no guarantees for a regular income. So you have to have a constant side hustle, but a side hustle that allows you, or day job, whatever you want to call it, that allows you to have the freedom to still explore your art, because otherwise you're going to get wrapped up into the grind, and then you kind of lose some of the drive for the art. It's an interesting, as Tish Hicks says, finding that harmony between those two worlds, and in your particular case of like needing to be able to pay the bills, but then also being able to create the art that is important to you and important to the world at large, but then also you have because you're over 40 and because you guys have been doing this for 15 years, you have a reputation. So it's like you're almost like could be mentors to people coming up. But like you just said, you feel like you're 19 again
Yeah.
because you feel like you're back to being broke.
Yeah. I was talking to a friend earlier today, and she was teaching a class on professional practices at the university. And so like, how do you be a professional artist? And she was reading there's like a book. I don't know the title of the book, but it's like, a number of like famous artists talk about how do you become an artist. And it's like letters to young artists. And she was reading one by Yoko Ono to the class and started crying because she was like, oh God, like, because she feels the same way. It's like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Where am I going with this? And then like, you still, I think you constantly feel, I don't think it's a positive thing. You're always anxious about where you're next, like how you're going to be making money. But it's good that we have these day jobs. I feel like I'm rambling here, but I suppose what I mean to say is that like, our day jobs have created a base for us that have allowed us to do these things. But there's other decisions that we made in our lives too, I think, that make it possible for what we do. Like we share bills, obviously, because we live together, right? So that's a major thing. We have those day jobs. We worked really hard to pay off our student loans, but in a short period of time, we were quite lucky. We started getting art projects. We were working our day jobs at the library, and we were running a studio space for the city of Calgary. Plus we were getting grants and making projects. So we just had like this sudden crash of money come at us, and we just threw everything we possibly could at our student loans, and it just freed us up so we didn't have that debt hanging over our heads.
Yeah. So you keep a low overhead.
Yeah, exactly.
What's it called?
Yeah, low overhead.
You keep a low overhead.
Yeah. We buy the exact same groceries every single week. No variations whatsoever that could really fuck up our budget. So it's like,
yeah. So then it's a lot of discipline.
Yeah. That's
basically like your life has a lot of discipline, not just in terms of like your budgeting and, to make the financial part work, but then also you have to be disciplined in your art, because otherwise you're not going to get anywhere and you're never going to make anything. Like in your discipline in your practice.
Yeah.
Is what I mean.
It's like, part of it for me is like, I find when I've got, this is maybe a weird thing. This is where we like crack open what's inside that man. But it's like, I feel like when I've got that kind of discipline, I feel like I'm winning in the world. And like, I don't know exactly how to explain it, but like when I don't spend money, I feel like I'm doing better. I feel like if I'm not indulging in things, I don't know how to explain it, but I just feel like, maybe it's just the way my brain works, but I just feel like, because we're all just very much driven towards becoming consumers, and like, we're far more interested in like, how can we be producers of things as opposed to just consuming. And to be able to do that just takes certain, we have to take certain risks.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you said that, because in my mind, I was going to the place where it's like, oh yeah, if you deprive yourself of something, it like kind of feels good. Like, but I feel like that's more like I feel like it's almost like an OCD kind of thing. Like whenever I'm like trying to lose some weight or something, and I'm like, yes, you didn't do this and you didn't do that today. And then I start to get a little in my head, which is like a whole different aspect of that. But but I know what you mean about not going towards the consumerism and like finding that discipline. I think it definitely feels better. Like when I'm in a good place in my life where I am kind of like doing all the things that I want to do, like I'm meditating and I'm exercising and I'm drinking my cup of tea after dinner instead of having a glass of wine, I feel like really good about myself. And I think I'm far more productive in general when I'm in those phases. Yeah.
And, I think it's a weird thing. It's no judgment on anyone's lifestyle, but there's something about, look, I was going to say something about that kind of reservation as an artist that makes sense, but there's so many artists who don't do that. So maybe that's not true at all. Most artists I know indulge in everything. I don't know. It's just like, for me, I feel like, the more I can focus on the work and like making things, the better I feel. Like, there's so many moments in my
Yeah.
life where daily where I'm just like, why am I doing this thing right now when I could take 10 minutes to write something down or
Mm-hmm.
or to generate an idea or whatever. And I catch myself all the time thinking like, stop this thing and do this other thing now.
Right.
And like, yeah, meditation is one of those things which is like, just do that. And instead of watching reruns of Rick and Morty,
Yeah.
But
I think there's also, for me, in terms of like when I'm living a disciplined life, then I'm also not numbing out.
mhm,
Because I think when I'm doing those things that aren't within the discipline, it's because I'm comfort eating,
mm,
or I'm just trying to, maybe I'm numbing out with TV, or I'm numbing out with Instagram, or
mhm,
numbing out with wine, whatever it is. It's because I'm avoiding my feelings. And when I'm in that more disciplined life, then I'm forcing myself to face it
mhm.
and process those feelings, which I think only leads to better art in general.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you're completely right. I think you've said it exactly as it is. Yeah. It's really important. Anyhow, I think those kinds of things are really important. And like, we talked about this recently where it's like, okay, so we're in our 40s. Let's say we live to be in our 80s. That's
Uh-huh.
still 40 years to make stuff.
Yeah.
And like, if you think about when we graduated at 20 or 21, we've only been at it for 20 years. So now we have like double that amount of time. That's
Yeah.
mind boggling to me. And it's like,
Yeah.
how do we set ourselves up so that we can like continue to make the work that we want to make in the future,
Yeah.
And like, I think that's what terrifies me. A close friend of ours often says, that the adage is that as people age, they become more conservative. And he's like, the older I get, the more punk rock I want to be. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly it. Like, I want to
Yeah.
get weirder and weirder as I get older, not more and more comfortable and reserved. That's my greatest fear is
yeah.
like feeling comfortable. And by that, I
Yeah.
mean like comfortable in the way I think about things, comfortable in the way that I do things, comfortable in like the way I relate to people. Obviously
Yeah.
like it should be, when I say comfortable, I don't mean on on a case by case basis, but generally overall, I don't want to become
Mhm.
complacent in these things because,
Yeah. I want to become more and more myself.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly what, like, you're becoming more of just like who you really are, embracing all the weird stuff about yourself, embracing all your flaws, embracing all the good stuff that people think is weird, and just being more and more yourself. And if that means that like you're gonna start wearing golf pants again, like and wearing, I don't know, neon green
Yeah.
on a daily basis, then do that.
Now we
Yeah.
know what all those old grandmas are all about when they have purple hair.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because they didn't do it when they were younger, probably. And so then now
Yeah,
they're just
yeah.
like, well, I mean, there's no time like the present. You might as well embrace
That's
it.
right.
I think that's like my favorite part of getting older, is that I'm becoming more and more myself,
Mm.
and constantly becoming more and more myself. I think when we were in Lancaster, I was the most myself I had ever been. Something about going abroad, I think, just like kind of like freed me up to just like explore and figure out who I am and like what I want to be. And I think coming back, I still had some of that, but then like as I crept more and more into my 20s, I started to lose that and started to try to like fit into boxes that I thought I was supposed to be in.
Mhm.
And now, like, as I'm coming into my 40s, I'm letting a lot of that stuff go. And, therapy helps with all that
Yeah.
stuff. I did a lot of therapy in my 30s that helped with all that stuff. But
I feel like I've been on
yeah.
a sort of similar parallel track, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Where you're right, like though that like early 20s, like man, we had so much confidence to do things.
Yeah.
And I feel like from the age of 20 or 20ish until like in the last year or so, my confidence has just gotten worse and worse and worse. And like
Yeah.
I believed in myself and the work that we were doing less and less and less. And yet something happened this year where I'm like, wait a second. I'm starting to have more confidence again. And like, I think that is something to do with, being in your early 40s. It's got to be a developmental stage, but I know exactly what you mean, where, I just feel like gradually my confidence got chipped away. And like, we talked about this a while back, where it was like, I don't have the same ambitions I used to when I was younger. Whereas like when I was younger, maybe my ambitions were to be a renowned artist or whatever it might have been. And now I don't care about that. I'm so much more focused on like the smaller interactions I can have with people. And those are places where I hope to make change, as opposed to like on a global scale. That's just, maybe you just, I recognize now that it's not going to happen. And nor would I want it to happen. I think to myself, like, well, why at that point in time was I so interested in like power? Ugh, it grosses me out now, but like now it's like, okay, how can we have these small interactions with people on like, on a daily basis, but certainly through our artwork? And how can those interactions help shape what the future might be for us and that other person or that group of people we're working with?
Yeah, well, because the one little change leads to change all over. Like your influence over my decisions with my yard could potentially, like I talk to my neighbor or I talk to my friend about what we're doing, and then maybe that inspires them, or maybe my kids when, they grow up and hopefully they have some land to tend to, that they remember like, oh yeah, my mom used to do this, or my mom said that this was something really important. We always have milkweed because we take care of the monarch, whatever it is. I think in the long run, the little changes are maybe more lasting, or the little influences are more lasting. It's something you said about the like losing the confidence in the 20s. When you were talking about it, I had the thought, I think the thing that like really started to chip away at my confidence is that, when you and I met, I was still very like, I'm a late bloomer. So it was like, just like this cute little ball of energy. Right. And then as I came into my 20s, like I kind of became sexualized, like even when we were in Lancaster, I was a virgin. Like I did not do anything with anybody. I was a Catholic girl. Not to say that I didn't like make out with a bunch of dudes in England. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I totally did that for sure. But like in terms of like when I got into my 20s, then I started to like come into my womanly self. And then people at large started to see me differently. And so then I think that's when I started to feel like I needed to fit into a box. I think that like really started to eat away at my confidence, because then I felt like I don't know who I am anymore because of the way that people saw me. It was different.
Yeah. Again, I think it kind of parallel things where, I mean, let's just name it. It's the patriarchy, man. And it's like, and I think, and, as a young artist, you have, aspirations and dreams, and then suddenly there's expectations on you from society of what you're supposed to be, how you're supposed to behave. Now that you've got a little bit of success, or now that you've got some sexuality, whatever it might, then suddenly you're supposed to behave in a certain way, or your trajectory is now this. And I think I think that's what eroded my confidence a lot of the time, where it was like, I ended up on paths that didn't feel right. To most people, they look like success. To me, they felt like I was participating in a society or a culture I didn't want to be part of. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
And anyhow.
So, well, then let me ask you, as you said, you don't like, you're kind of starting over. Do you and Mia kind of have an idea of what this is going to be like as you go into your 40s and as you get into the next 40 years of your artistic career, and maybe 50 years if you're lucky? What do you look forward to, or do you have an idea of what that could be?
I think we want things to be slower.
Yeah.
So we work at a ridiculous pace. Like, when people's lives were falling apart during the pandemic, we had some of the busiest years of our lives. I think we want to try to find ways to not be as busy. I don't know if that's true. If we don't want to be as busy, I think we don't want to have to work as hard. That's not also true either. I think we do want to work hard, but we also don't want to be busy. It's like,
you're just full of lies.
Yeah. I think we want to, I'm not sure. I have no idea. Actually, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I know there
Yeah.
are things that hang over us that we're really concerned about. Like, okay, like, how do we do this? Because we burned out now probably 3 or 4 times. Like, once you burn out, you're always at the edge of burnout. Like, if burnout is 100,
Yeah.
when you're not burned out, you're still operating at 99. So just, to burn out just is very easy. And I think we want to try to figure out how we can have a practice where we aren't always going to burn out at the end of a process. Like, coming back from this 10 months that we were just on, like, both of us are wiped out. Like, we have zero energy anymore. And like, we know we have a problem when we start dreaming about full-time regular jobs. And that's where we've been several times in the last 8 years, where we're like, wait a sec, what would it be like if we just got a job? And then we're like, whoa, we need to slow down. So I think we want to try to find a pace that we can work at that doesn't replicate the way that we've been working for the last 15 years. It's just been too fast. It's there's no complaints really, but we just know that we can't sustain that pace. I think that another major thing is the climate crisis. Like, it's very much on our minds. Particularly, like, we took 9 flights this year. We drove over 5,000 kilometers. Is that the best approach to, art making, destroying the planet in the process? We're not sure. So we want to conduct kind of some like research around that this year, and into the next couple of years, thinking about how do we change our practice? What does it look like? So no real, I can't say this is what it's going to be, but we know what the things are that nag at us that we need to make sure that we're paying attention to.
I think it's important that you have your core values. And it sounds like that's what you guys are looking at right now, is like, let's reassess our core values, because that's going to help guide you as you go forward and decide what kind of projects you make, who you want to work with, where that money is coming from.
Yeah.
All that. I think that's probably all super important things for the type of work that you guys are doing.
Yeah.
Are you finding it, I guess, in terms of like the available projects and grants that are out there, or do you feel like they're like coming out at the same pace, or do you think it's more or less now versus when you first started 15 years ago, like more or less opportunities?
It's probably about the same, I think.
Okay.
Whereas we would have created the opportunities for ourselves originally, it's easier for us to find festivals or organizations to work with.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's, I think we're still kind of the same pace. And weirdly, we've started to, because when I say that we want to work at a slower pace, we've experimented with that, where we said, maybe we can solve that by doing longer term projects. But it takes a lot of energy to sustain relationships for multiple years with people. So I don't know if that's the best approach either. But when you have those longer projects, you might not be producing products as much, but the amount of effort that goes into like maintaining relationships is the equivalent of like doing project after project after project, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think I run grant writing workshops every once in a while. And the way I start my grant writing workshops is I show a slide of all of the grants that I've gotten as an artist since 2002 or something. And it works out to be probably about, let's say, $450,000 to $500,000, which sounds like a lot of money, and it really is. But when you split it up over a 20-year career, that's, $20,000 a year. And then, is that math right? I don't know what the math is.
I don't do fast
math.
math.
Shit, man. Whatever it is, leave some comments in the but nonetheless, like, that money,
it's not a lot of money.
It's not a lot of money. Most of that goes towards paying for supplies, it pays for travel and whatever else. So like, the amount of money that we actually see to live on is maybe 10% of that. So like, that's $50,000 over 20 years is not a lot of money. So it's like, but we've been very successful with grants for a number of years. I don't know if that will continue or not, but most of our projects are funded through grants. So we tend not to do projects unless they're funded. And that's just,
Yeah.
the reason being is not because we wouldn't want to do the work anyways, but it's more so like we apply for 4 or 5 grants and hope 2 come through. And then those 2 grants
Yeah.
are like fill your time for the year or whatever it is. So
Yeah, I was just curious if people were still funding the arts, basically, because I know at least in the US it seems like the funding has changed, but I'm sure in other countries it's not so dire.
Yeah, we've often felt really privileged to be artists in Canada because the funding works differently. At least the artists that we know in the United States who kind of have to produce things and sell them more. So there's more emphasis on making and selling things versus artists where in Canada, I feel like you can get money just to like make something, and it doesn't have to be a product necessarily. The funding in Canada is fine right now. Obviously, like everyone wants it always to be more. We just got a small grant yesterday to do some, as I explained earlier, to kind of look at the networks that we could be working in and those kinds of things. I think the total the total amount of grants that were applied for equaled $547,000, and I think they only had $180,000. So it's like, there's always artists who aren't being funded, and I think that's I'm not sure what happens to those artists who don't get money. We've just been really fortunate, and I think there's something about that speaks somewhat to the art industry and the granting industry, that I'm good at writing grants and I know how to get money, but that doesn't necessarily make us better artists than other people. So it's the funding system, I think, is complicated, and it's a bit it's not always equitable who gets funding.
Well, even you saying that, it makes me think of, like, for actors, the audition process.
Yeah.
There are a lot of really great actors out there who barely work, or who aren't mega movie stars, and it's not because they're not talented. It's just because whatever it is. It's maybe the roles haven't been written for them, or they're not being seen the same way that some of these other artists are. And so, I've been thinking about this a lot, like listening to your podcast about, and I don't know the history of the people who've been on your podcast. So this is not a reflection on them by any stretch, but like just the arts in general, historically, and even to today, that like, if you look at people in Hollywood, most of those people had family members who were already in Hollywood. Like the ways in which, we look at artists who are successful, and I think we feel envy, but then sometimes we forget that those people had parents or grandparents in positions of power, or their educations were paid for and they didn't have student loan debt. So they or they got inheritances or whatever it might be. Like, I have to remind myself sometimes that like those artists who I sometimes am envious of likely had a head start that the rest of us don't have. And I try to keep that in check and try to keep that that perspective in mind sometimes when I'm envious of what people are doing, or what I'm wondering, like, why is this not better for us? And I guess I realized because, we didn't start out in the same place as some of those other people And I think that's very true of in the especially in
film
Hollywood
world, right? Yeah. So it's like,
that's a big part of it, nepotism. And I think people often forget that. And that's where they say the comparison is death. You just really can't compare your career, your situation to anybody else's, because otherwise you're just going to ruin yourself mentally and emotionally.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there is no comparison to, from one person's story to another person's story.
Yeah. I think like one of the things that's really critical is just having community, and the people who are your peers, and the people who you trust, and the people you want to spend time with. I think that's ultimately for me, like what's most important now is like not success in kind of, stereotypical terms, but like, what is the community of people that we're around? I think that's really important to me. And like, that's kind of how I started my
Yeah.
practice, right? It was like, we decided to stay in Calgary, and I started curating festivals and whatever else. And it was because we wanted to know who the community was. And like, that community is kind of dispersed and is gone now, but we're building other communities all the time around our practice. And I think that's really important. And that's where the fun is.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that is so super important. Even like just starting this podcast, I feel like I'm building more and more community for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And even I think even other actors who listen, or other artists who listen to this, they feel like they're a part of this community where we're all like, these artists, we're all talking about like the struggles and the challenges and the but also like the good and the rewards of it all. And I think it's made a big difference about how I feel about my own career. There's a number of things that have changed in the last 6 months that have made a big difference about how I feel about my career.
Mm-hmm.
One is starting this podcast, because I'm making something.
Yeah.
2 is now I'm working full time, so I don't have as much time to sit in my thoughts. And then because of all that mental energy that's redirected, when I do get an audition, I can just kind of focus on it, do a good job, and then I just have to let it go. I have to let it go because I don't have time. And so I don't have that mental anguish of whether or not I got it,
Yeah. I had the same thought when you were talking about the podcast is like building a community. Every time I listen to it, I'm like, wow, this is one other person now that's like in this, within the community, or in this, there's this group of people who are having this conversation. To me, that's really, I think it's great. I don't mean to get, weirdly excited about the podcast, but it's really made an impact on my life. I'm like, yes, these are the things I'm thinking about, and like hearing other people talk about where they're coming from and what they're doing and the trajectory of their careers were. And anyhow, it's been great.
I get it. It though, because like I've listened to plenty. The whole reason I started the podcast is because I would listen to other people's podcasts and I'd be like, oh, but I want to say something.
Yeah.
So now I have a podcast where I do get to chime in and say that thing that I was wanting to say when I was listening to somebody else's podcast.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to the idea that society pressure on artists. And I can't remember where I heard this, probably a podcast. But somebody had talked about how like in the US, there's so much shame around not making your full income and your full living as whatever your art discipline is, whereas they compared it, and I don't know if this is true because I'm not European, but in some European countries the expectation isn't that you're going to make your full living wage as an artist. If you're an artist, it's known, it's like, well, yeah, of course you're a waiter, or of course you have this other day job, and the art is there too. It doesn't mean that your art is bad. It's just, that's just the nature of what it is. Like for me personally, I know I've been trying to embrace that idea. Like, yeah, it's okay that my full income doesn't come from whatever I'm making. That's fine. That should be expected. Mm-hmm. And embrace the fact that I'm going to have something else that's going to provide the steady income that allows me to do the art that I want to make.
Yeah. I mean, that was a decision, I guess, that we made early on as an artist team, was, to have those decent unionized jobs that gave us the flexibility to make what we make. I can't stress the importance of that enough, because, there's the image that we all grew up on of the artist laying on a mattress next to a radiator in a loft in Manhattan in the 1960s. Like, we all wanted to be that person, right? But it's not that romantic. I live in a housing cooperative right now, and that gives us rent control, which is another added thing that allows us to do what we do. But it's cold as shit. Like I said to Mia earlier, I was like, I feel like I'm in prison. Like, it's so cold outside. I don't want to go outside. It's so cold inside. It's so dry in here. Like, I can barely breathe. I'm like, this sucks. But it just gave us some stability that, and we do have savings. Like, we have savings that we hope to retire on someday. Like, we're working towards having those kinds of savings. Yeah, and that's kind of what our day job gives us, because we don't have benefits. When I grew up, my mom's whole thing was like, get a job, get a pension, get a job, get a pension. And that was what was drilled into me. First, I hate authority, so I knew I could never really have a proper boss. I couldn't be in that. I couldn't do that. We've just been able to set some money aside so that eventually we might not have to have our day jobs and we can just do our artwork or whatever. But Also, because we live and work together, that means we're always with each other. And I think what saved our relationship is that having day jobs, because that's the only time we're not together. So it's like for 10 to 20 hours a week, we don't see each other. And I think that gives us the ability to keep going forward with our practice.
Well, but I think so much of an artist struggle, and you know, I can most of my reference points as actors is the idea that you're failing because you're not making all your money from being on TV. And so I love the idea that just choosing to say, no, I am going to have this day job. And then I'm also going to do this. And if one day I'm able to make my full income from the acting, then that's great. But I've already decided that I know that this is going to be my life. I'm going to have a day job and I'm going to do acting, and I'm not going to expect this to feed me completely. That saves you so much mental anguish. And I wish I had come to that decision a long time ago.
Yeah. No, that's a really good, it's a really good point. And
it's just a mindset. It's if you go in with a different mindset, then it's not so torturous.
Yeah. I think it's important, you know, we know this, you know, at this point, because it's part of our angst, I think, of being the age we are, where we're like, how much time did we spend doing things we didn't want to do? And or why didn't I take time away from whatever it might have been, you know? So I guess my point is there's something nice about having the job, like a day job that we have, because it takes you away from your art practice for a while. Yeah. And I think that's really important. Now I try to take actual, during the pandemic, Mia and I learned to take weekends off. That was the first time we'd ever taken time off.
Yeah.
In a kind of regular way. And similarly, but that's how I always felt my day job was. You know, I was done with the art practice and I was going to go to work for a few hours, you know, and it really made a huge difference because it was just a different pace. It was a different community of people that I was engaging with because I work at a college. So it was all the students. And so it was just a very different thing. I think that's really important. There's something about that, you know, that you're not just tied to an art community or a theater community or whatever, you know, that you have relationships outside of that. And I think it's hard if you don't have a job.
Yeah. Because then it's just like being back in college.
Yeah.
And you just think you're brilliant because everybody around you tells you that you're brilliant and you all have your heads up each other's asses. I think that's a really good point.
And you know, the other thing too, that having a day job affords you is that you can say no to stuff. Because you don't have to take every single shitty gig just to make money.
Yeah.
Right? Because then you're not doing your work either. You're doing somebody else's work for them. Or, you know what I mean? You're just taking all these big gigs, whether it's I'll take this, you know, role in a children's theater piece because I need to make some money to pay the bills, or you know, whatever it might be. That's equally as horrifying, I think. Because you're still not, you're not making your work either. So I think it's important to have that kind of, to have that kind of balance in your life.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah,
that's great.
Also, I love saving money. So the more I can earn, even though it's not a lot, the more I can save.
Me too. It feels good. So I usually ask, I think you already answered this question, but I usually ask if you have any advice for someone who's maybe looking to start making art now or is coming up right now. A young person maybe starting out on their art journey. Yeah.
So, I mean, community is number one, I think. Find a community, make a community if you have to. If you're in a small town where there is no community, create the context for a community to be made. Get yourself a good unionized casual job somewhere so you can take time off or your hours can fluctuate. Try to find stable housing and just keep making stuff. Make as much stuff as you can and hope that some of it's good.
Yeah.
I think that's the key.
You know what's so funny, Eric, is that it didn't occur to me until we were talking about our Lancaster days, where we straight up we devised this whole play and we were making content. Back in 99, 2000, we were making content. And then I came back here and I was like, I don't know how to make like when YouTube was coming out, oh God, it looks so hard to make content. And now that's woman, you knew how to do it. You were doing it when you were 20 years old.
Yeah, yeah.
Just because it was like on a different medium, it was on stage instead of on camera. You know, I know that technology made it easier for now, but like, yeah.
But
Anyway,
I think
that's
yeah, and I think that's a real quandary. You know, starting in your 40s, like, you know, what is it that one hopes to achieve in that situation? You know, like, again, if you've got 40 years to work, is it that you hope to pay your bills by acting, or is it that you find a community of people and a bunch of weirdos you can do shit with for the next 30 years? You know, and I don't know. I would choose the latter if I.
Yeah.
Oftentimes I think I would stop making art tomorrow if I could, but I need to keep doing it for the money.
I think there can be two, though. I think you can make some art for the money, and then you can make art that's for yourself.
Yeah.
Like, there's definitely scripts that I want to write because I'm like, oh, I think that could sell. Like, if I wrote that, maybe that would be a good idea and I could maybe sell that.
Yeah.
And then there's stuff that's just like, oh, this means something to me and I want to make this for me.
Yeah.
So then the last question that I'll ask you is, what does making it mean to you? I think you kind of answered some of this as well, but what does success look like to you now versus when you like first started out in this career?
Yeah, I was going to say something terrible. I was going to say success now
Eric, no.
Success now is not being canceled for saying something stupid. Sometimes I say to me, I'm like, we only have to get through 15 years without being idiots. Anyways, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
Success, you know, I think for me, again, it's about, truthfully, I don't know, actually. Yeah. In my mind, you know, what's interesting is I immediately went to what does success look like? And I think I want to get away from that idea of what's being successful is, and instead making it being something completely different, which is like, how can I enjoy what I do? I think that's something I really want in the future. Oftentimes I don't enjoy what we do. Just too much work.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, that's sad, Eric. Why are you doing it?
Well, I also love it.
Yeah.
And also, you know, I don't want a boss.
I hear you.
Yeah. But I think the difference, as I said earlier, is like, my ambitions have changed. My intentions have changed. And, I'm interested in asking hard questions about what we should be doing as artists. This is not the answer to your question, but I often wonder whether or not we should be making art anymore. I'm not convinced, not just me personally, but, you know, people in general. I don't know if what's being created is of any benefit. I'm coming full circle now because the Dadaist in me goes, well, art is just continuing to create a horrible society, you know?
Yeah.
Or you know, anyhow, I don't know. Terrible ending.
From you, I would expect nothing less. No, but I get it. I get it. Well, I think you and I kind of touched on that conversation a little bit last week, or about like when you look at like all the art that we're trying to preserve and all the energy, all the fossil fuels that are used to like keep the temperatures a certain room and keep the museum a certain way and whatever, just so this art is preserved.
Yeah.
Is that really benefiting us at some point? Or should we be letting the art decay because that's what it's supposed to do? Because we're all going to decay anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So if we let the art decay, then like new art is going to come in and maybe that's what we need. Maybe we don't need to, you know, like maybe there is some beauty in like finding the decaying Roman statues and like we can say like, okay, that's what that was. And well, what am I going to make? And at the end of the day, aren't we all recreating the same shit anyway? We just keep recycling the same stories because like we all think that we're having this new experience. And then like we find out that like, oh no, our parents lived the same experience. Our grandparents had similar experience.
Yeah.
We're trying to do better. We're trying to make it a little bit better. Like I do think that each generation does a little bit better and traumatizes each other a little bit less. But the thing that I'm like, as a parent, what I've learned to accept is like, you're always going to fuck up your kid. You can't help it. As great of a parent as you are, you're always going to fuck up your kid just a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's okay because that's part of their journey. They have to because then they can get better, and then maybe they don't fuck up their kid, or maybe the cycle ends with them and they don't have kids. I don't know.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we are recycling the same stories in different ways. So maybe we should just burn it all down, Eric.
This is my dream. You know that.
I know it's your dream.
Yeah.
I'm so excited.
Maybe
to have this
that's
conversation
maybe that's what success looks like now. Making it after 40 is letting it all burn.
Yeah. Maybe that is what it is. Oh, well, on that note, I think we have to wrap it up.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect ending to this conversation.
Loved it.
Yeah,
and,
me too.
And thanks for doing this podcast. It's great. I should say, I told my friends about it. They were all jealous. They said, I'm over 40. Why isn't she talking to me?
Well, send me. Yeah, you got to send me. You sent me at least one of your friends.
Yeah,
I think
I'll send you a list.
Yeah. I'm starting to get a big list. So I've been starting to get more people reaching out, and so
awesome.
I got a plan 2023. I'm excited.
Sweet.
Actually, I think this is the last episode of 2022. I think you're going to be the last one.
Sweet. Well, here, can I give people one more piece of advice?
Absolutely. Let's hear it.
Celebrate the Christian New Year. Mm-hmm. But if things don't go so well in the first few weeks, you've always got the Lunar New Year. Celebrate, start again.
Yes. Yeah. There you go. I think that's great. I think that's perfect. Awesome.
Cool. Okay.
All right. Well,
Lisa,
Eric,
I love you so much.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah.
I love you too.
Okay.
Bye. Burn it down, folks. Burn it down. Thank you all for listening to this week's episode. You can follow Eric and his partner Mia on Instagram at mia.and.eric. You can also check out their website, miaanderic.ca, to see their work. Or for specific projects, check out their most recent project, 3 Woods, at their website, 3-woods.com, or their project, Rewrite a Bylaw, at futureperfectbylaws.com. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen. A review for the holidays would be a wonderful, magical way to close out these last 6 months of podcasting and set me up for success in the new year. Be sure to follow the show on Instagram at makingitafter40, the number 40, and to catch up on what I'm doing when I'm not podcasting, check out my Instagram at Lisa Rodriguez. Thank you all for listening, friends, for this entire 6 months. And I wish you happy holidays and a happy new year. And I can't wait to see what 2023 brings us, guys. See you then.